Our attendance is a little bit lower than usual, which makes me wonder if maybe some of the students are taking advantage of the mental health day option today, and that's fine. As I mentioned on Wednesday, I'm more than happy to have students take personal time when they need it, and then, the recording is going to be posted both on Blackboard and on YouTube, so I think that's great. Well, let's go ahead and begin. We got some interesting stuff to cover today. Just a announcement. You've submitted homework 11 just now. That was the single problem having to do with packaging bundles together of alternatives and finding out which combination of options is most profitable. So the next homework assignment that you've got is due on Wednesday the 11th, and that's related to break-even and payback. That's due on Wednesday, and then the project is due on the 20th. Now, just to give you a little bit more support on the project and to take some time reviewing what I've already showed you before, I thought what I'd do is go through an example spreadsheet today and show you what your spreadsheet might look like for the project. Now, this is a project where I really encourage personalization, and I welcome students to figure out what works best for them and tailor what they put into the report to their actual circumstances of their life. So don't think that just because I'm showing you one way of summarizing the data today that that's the only way it can be. But I do hope that it's also going to be useful. So let me bring up that example spreadsheet and we can look at it together. Okay. Now, what I do expect is that somewhere in your report, in the body text, there needs to be a table that has these columns. In your spreadsheet, you can have other tabs down here at the bottom. You might have a tab that's specifically for income, and then another tab that's related to expenses, and another tab that you're identifying the different places that you're going to put your investments. And that's fine to have, other parts of a spreadsheet, but it needs to have one summary where all of this information is included together in this same format. And so this is just a hypothetical student that thinks they're going to be graduating in 2021, and they have already in the body report explained their assumptions having to do with income. And so the student identified which job that they want, where they found the information about what the salary is likely to be for that job. Basically, all of the supporting deals for that first starting salary. And likewise, the similar thing in the body report and maybe also elsewhere in the spreadsheet, there would be a very detailed summary of the ongoing expenses. And so that's the sorts of things like specific amounts that you're going to put towards housing and transportation costs, healthcare, food, entertainment expenses, and so on. All of the things that your money goes to. Because by definition, if you have income that you don't spend, then you've saved it. Any income that you don't spend has been saved. And by the way, taxes are another expense. Most people will think about their salary on a pre-tax basis. If your company gives you a letter saying that they're going to hire you for $43,000 a year, what they're saying is that's the amount of gross income that you're going to receive from that job, and then your net income, the amount that's actually in your paycheck, is reduced by a variety of withholdings like taxes, for example, and maybe a portion of your withholding also goes to retirement, like a 401k contribution. The 401k contribution wouldn't be considered an expense, though. It's considered savings. And so be very cautious about how you differentiate between income, expenses, and savings. So somewhere there is a detailed explanation so that when I look at your spreadsheet, I'm going to know what went into your assumptions about the costs that are shown. Some years there are extraordinary expenses, maybe in the case of getting married or having a child or buying a car or buying a boat, but you don't have those kinds of expenses every single year, which is why we put it in a separate category. So now, here's the first column, column F, where there's some sort of calculation. And the amount you save in a year is what your income was minus the regular expenses minus the extraordinary expenses. And so what I'm saying is, by definition, any money that you've earned that you don't spend has been saved. Whether it's in your checking account or your savings account or a Roth IRA or a 401k, it doesn't matter where it goes. If you have funds that haven't been spent, then you've saved them. All right. So in this person's first year, you'll notice that the cumulative savings balance that they have is just simply equal to the amount that they saved in that year. And so what that means is that they didn't have any savings to begin with. They got out of college with both zero debt but also zero savings. And so the first year's cumulative savings balance for this person is simply equal to the amount that they saved that year. In your case, if you do have student loan debt, or if you already have some assets from working in the past, you can start your cumulative savings balance at whatever you currently have, and then also the amount that will be saved in that first year. If you didn't previously have any assets, then you're not going to earn any interest this year. And so in the first year of this spreadsheet, the investment yield is 0 because this person didn't have any savings in their account last year. And so the investment yield amount for the row that you're on is based on what was your savings balance in the previous year. A couple of other elements I want to show on the spreadsheet. One is that we have identified a cost of living adjustment. This is a rate that the wages are increasing. And so some of the years it's a big jump. So look, from 43,000 to 50,000. That's not just a 2% jump. What that person has assumed is that after a year of working, maybe they got a different job or got a promotion or an increase in pay based on having now more experience. And so in your report, in the write-up, you need to tell me about all those assumptions, because if I see suddenly a big jump in salary and it's not explained anywhere, you're going to get a little bit of a deduction, because the report is required for you to document what you've done. There's a question about whether you would include a vehicle as an asset if it's paid for before the analysis. No, I wouldn't consider that as an asset, because what we're looking for is liquid assets where it's money that you could spend, potentially. And so you could sell a vehicle and then it would become an asset. But as long as it's something that you're putting into service on a daily basis, like your clothing or your house even, or your vehicle, I think that it's best just to exclude that from this, which is really just about the financial instruments. Good question, though. I'm glad you asked that. Okay, so back to the idea of the wage increases. So you'll notice sometimes it's a big jump having to do with maybe an assumed promotion. But other times, what it's doing is it's increasing by a certain percentage from the previous year. So when the person is in 2023, their income is 2% higher than the last year. And so the formula was 1 plus I times the previous year amount. So that's where 51,000 comes from. And then the next year, it's cumulative. It's not just an extra $1,000. Now it's 2% larger than the year before that. And so 2% larger than 51,000 is $52,020. So it's progressively building each year, and there may occasionally be these subsequent jumps. You may have, after a few years of interest rate increases, maybe now you assume, well, at the age of 30, I'm going to get a big promotion, and now instead of just the normal wage increase rate dictating what I earn, maybe now I'll be up to $60,000. It's a big jump. And then everything beyond that would increase now on a percentage basis. So the percentage trend would continue. So that's income. And expenses, likewise, have sometimes discrete jumps, and sometimes it has percentage jumps. And so in this year, it's our starting expenses, and then the year after that, it's a 3% more than the prior year, and then 3% more than the year before that, and another 3%. But now look, between age 26 and 27, that happened to be the year that this person apparently got married. And so they had 25,000 in extraordinary expenses, and now also their regular expenses are higher. So probably this 32,000 is coming from the fact that now there's another person in the household. And so it may be that you want to live in a nicer place, or now your auto insurance is more expensive, or you're spending more on food, and so the regular expenses have increased. And then after that, then the inflation kicks in again for a couple of years. And so anytime you make one of these discrete jumps from the previous years where it's been a percentage and now you're jumping up ahead, you need to explain, maybe in this case where it went from 36,016 up to 43,000, that was having to do with maybe having a child, and now there's 3 people in the household instead of 2. There's a question about what if you trade in a car and then buy a car? Yeah, you would subtract the trade-in value from the cost of the car. So it would just be the net money that you're going to have to pay. Okay, now here's the trickiest thing of all. And if you've been totally spaced out until now and not paying attention, this is the point where you should really focus in. The investment yield amount. Students kind of chronically struggle in calculating that. And so I wanted to point out that it's based on the previous year's cumulative savings balance. How much interest you earn isn't just based on how much you saved this year. It's based on the total amount of your financial instruments in the previous year. And so, for example, here at age 24, the cumulative savings balance is 5.5%. The investment yield is 5.5% of the previous year's cumulative savings balance. And so this person earned $12.95 in interest because of how much money was in the bank, in the 401k, in the checking account, the savings account. You know, you average all of those different locations together and find out what's the weighted return on that pool of assets, what's the average percentage return on that pool of assets. And now what this is going to show you is that in a given year, you're going to be earning interest based on the previous year's cumulative savings balance. And so now here it is. The cumulative savings balance for year 24. How much money is in the bank at the end of 2022? Well, it's how much was in the bank last year. So the cell above. So it's last year's balance plus the new money that you saved this year. So the leftover income from this year, and then also the investment yield amount from this year. So that's the interest that was based on last year's earnings. And so there's 3 components that's going to be increasing the cumulative savings balance. Okay, Julian, you have a question about buying a car. You can either consider it as a regular expense if you think that you're always going to be maybe every 5 years getting a new car. So some people just always have a car payment. And in that case, maybe you could count it as a regular expense. Other people are going to buy a car and hold on to it for 10 years. And so in that case, if you're going to use your savings to purchase a car outright as a lump sum, then maybe it would make more sense to consider it as an extraordinary expense. The point is you can do it either way. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you on today's help for the project, is just how this spreadsheet fits together. If you have specific questions about your spreadsheet or about the assumptions you're making for the project, I'd welcome you to contact me via email or on Teams, and I'd be glad to go over it with you. But we need to leave the project there for now. Okay, so what we're going to do today is talk about break-even analysis. And there's a template file that I'm going to need to share with you in just a minute. But this is a different kind of break-even than we've talked about in prior class meetings. In our previous class meetings, we've talked about break-even as the transition from losing money to now being profitable. And what we're going to be talking about today is break-even between alternatives. So remember, in last class meeting, what we did was we looked at the curve of revenue. And remember that when you have an increase in demand, the way that you caused that demand was by pulling on the price lever. By lowering the price, demand was increased, and that's why the revenue is declining. And so here we were talking about break even as this D'1 and D prime 2. And so the break-even points were the first point of operation where you are going to be generating a profit, where for the first time your revenue is larger than your costs. Remember that cost has two components. It has the fixed cost and the variable cost. And so the first break-even point is just what volume of production will allow you to have more revenue than cost. And then the second break-even point is where it's the last opportunity. If you make any more than that and sell it, then you're going to be reducing your selling price such that the revenue is lower than the cost. And so here what we meant by the break-even points were the range of values that you can produce and sell and earn money. We're going to be talking in slightly different terms today. And just as an illustration of a couple of vocabulary items, let's consider the case of what if you were operating a business where you were making Twinkies. And this is a useful illustration because making Twinkies would have both fixed costs and variable costs. And so the fixed costs would be those expenses that are associated with just having the building, having the equipment, and it isn't necessarily related to how much of the thing you're making. So in the case of Twinkies, you'd have fixed costs being like the insurance, the owning the equipment, the rent, maybe even some of the utilities are fixed costs. Maybe, for instance, the sewer charge is not affected by whether you're having 1 shift, 2 shift, 3 shift. It may be an unmetered sewer, and so it would be considered as a fixed cost. But there are also variable costs. And so in the case of a Twinkie manufacturing operation, the variable costs would be the labor fees associated with the workers who are there on an hourly basis. It would be the cost of sugar and industrial seed oil and flour and packaging. So all of the things that go into Twinkies would be considered as variable cost, because if you make 1,000,000 Twinkies in an afternoon, you're going to have higher variable costs than if you just make 1,000 Twinkies in an afternoon. And so those are related to the level of productivity. So you can see the list of things that are sometimes considered as variable costs. So in the figure that we had of costs last time, we said that the total costs were those that are fixed plus those are variable. And so the fixed costs is the horizontal line. The variable cost can either be a curve or a line, but it starts at 0 because if you're not making any units, you'd have no variable cost. And then it increases linearly from there. So total cost, the blue line, is the sum of the two. Now, this is if you have a linear cost relationship, meaning that whether you buy a little or a lot, you still have the same price per item for all of your variable cost constituents. Sometimes, though, if you buy a lot of something, you'll get a discount. So think about what you would probably pay for a bag of sugar if you went to Walmart. If you just bought a 5-pound bag of sugar, I don't know what the cost of a bag of sugar is. Let's say it's $2. So $2 for 5 pounds is what you pay when you buy a little bit of it. But if you're going to buy an entire rail car of sugar, like if it was going to come in on an industrial size and they don't have to pay for the packaging as much and you're really doing a big bulk purchase, then it's possibility that the more you buy, the lower your price is. And so here, what this nonlinear cost relationship is showing is the curve, the variable costs are getting progressively less expensive the more that you make. And so this curve is flattening out. And that's called an economy of scale. An economy of scale is where you begin to have lower costs the more of something that you make. And it's not lower costs overall, it's lower cost per unit. And so the variable costs are still getting higher. It's just that that curve is flattening out because your cost per pound or your cost per foot of wrapping plastic is decreasing over time. So that's a nonlinear cost relationship. Okay, so this is zooming in on the curve that we were looking at here. If we zoom in on this part, I don't know if you can see my cursor today. If we zoom in on the left break-even point, then it would look like this. And so it's the point at which the revenue is just barely starting to be higher than the costs is that first break-even point. And anything to the right of that is profit. So revenue is the amount of money that's coming in, and that's the price that you're selling for and the number that you've sold. And at that inflection point is where you go from the total cost being higher than the revenue to the opposite. Okay, now when you start to get that bulk discount, or for whatever reason, if your variable cost per unit decreases, then what it does is it shifts break-even point to the left. And this is an important phenomena that you need to be able to understand and describe. This is like rich, fertile territory for a concept question if you ever have any upcoming exams. So what this is showing is that if your costs decrease, in this illustration, the costs before are in black. You see the TC in black, and then the blue line is the total costs after some change has occurred. After the variable cost per unit decreases, what the point of intersection does is it moves to the left. And so if you suddenly now are paying 10 cents a pound for sugar instead of 20 cents a pound for sugar, then that means that you don't have to make as many to cover the fixed costs. And so the break-even point moves to the left. So that's the relationship that I wanted to tell you about. And that first break-even point is the fixed costs divided by the cost per unit, the revenue per unit minus the cost per unit. So R minus V. That's how you can find that first break-even point. Lower the cost curve, break-even point moves left. Now, this is what we're going to be working on for today's in-class exercise, is break-even between alternatives. So what this figure is proposing is that there may be two options that you can choose from. You've got alternative 1 and alternative 2. And maybe let's say that they're two different machines. And one of the machines has a higher upfront cost, and one of them has a higher operating cost. So tell me, can you tell just by looking at it which of them has the higher operating costs? Is it alternative 1 or alternative 2 that has the higher operating cost per unit? I think it says it right there on the bulleted list. Alternative 1 has the higher operating cost per unit, and but it makes up for that by having the lower fixed cost. So remember, what you want to do is you want to minimize your expenses. And so the lowest of those two lines is the one that you should select. And so if you're to the left of the break-even point, then you'd choose alternative 1. If you're to the right of the break-even point, you choose alternative 2. In other words, excuse me, if you're making just a few, then it's better to buy the cheaper option up front. If you're not going to be making a lot of them, spend less up front. But if you're going to be making a lot of the items, then the lower upfront cost of alternative 1 is outweighed by the lower variable cost of alternative 2. So we're going to look at break-even between alternatives today, and we're going to try and pick, depending on how many units you're making, whether you should go with one option or the other. So today in our in-class exercise, you're going to be considering which equipment to buy. And so you're going to identify the break-even point where the two alternatives are equal using GoalSeek. We're going to have a spreadsheet template that I'll email you here in just a moment as a starting point. And then we're going to put the data from the in-class exercise in and try and find out which of the two options is going to minimize the cost. So let me share that file with you. Let me see if I can maybe do it through here. I think that Excel files are not a supported file type. Okay, I will have to share it by email. So just give me 1 second to do that. This template file will save you from having to type in all of the column titles and do the formatting. So let me just ICE 32 template attached. Okay, I've sent you that email, so hopefully you'll receive it within a second or two. Let me open it up and so that we can look at it together. I don't see, okay, yeah, I see it on my end now. Okay, so here's the template file. Let's look at the question itself. Let's see at what's being asked. Okay, so if you've got it printed out, you've got the paper there in front of you, hopefully. Good, thanks for letting me know that you've got it. Okay, so we have two options. Option one is a computer-controlled piece of equipment. It's production equipment. It might be like a lathe of some sort. So the computer-controlled option costs $2 million up front compared to only $1.3 million for the thing that's manually controlled. So getting that computer control increases the first cost quite a lot. But the good news is it looks like it has a longer useful life compared to the manual control option, and so there's a difference there. Also, this manual control piece of equipment has no salvage value, whereas the computer-controlled equipment does have a salvage value. Okay, so option one lasts longer and it has more value at the end of its useful life. The other advantage that it has is that the labor costs are lower. It might be the case that it doesn't require a skilled operator in the same way that manual control does, or maybe it needs fewer people to operate that piece of equipment. So the labor cost per hour is less, and it works more quickly. Whatever this machine is, when it's in operation, it can make 3 widgets an hour. Whatever it's making, it can do 3 of them an hour. Whereas option 2 is it's a slower machine. If you need a certain number of items made, option 2 is going to take longer because it can only make 2.4 units per hour under manual control. So option 1 is better in every way except that higher first cost. And so the question is it worth getting option 1? Well, under some circumstances, it's going to be less costly to go with option 2. If you're making very few items, then option 2 is going to minimize your costs. But if you're making a lot of items, then option 1 is more beneficial. So we're going to try and, first of all, determine the capital recovery for each of these alternatives. Remember, the definition of capital recovery is it's an annualized amount that takes into account the difference between the first cost and the salvage value. And so it's how much money you need to earn each year just to cover the cost of the equipment. So we're going to determine the capital recovery amount using Excel. We're also, in the template that I've given you, we're going to analyze which one is better at 1,000 units per year. Which one gives you the lower cost at 1,000 units per year? Then we're going to turn the tables and say, what if we're making 3,000 units per year? See if now the other of the alternatives is less expensive. And then we're going to look for the break-even point using GoalSeek. Okay, so with this template file, I'd like to pause for a moment and give you a chance to figure this out. I don't want to just jump into showing you the answer, but I think you can fill in a lot of these blanks and start calculating, for example, the the capital recovery. The capital recovery is down here as the fixed cost. So let me pause for a moment and give you a chance to start filling in the data into the template file based on the information from the handout. And then as we do, I will rejoin in a few minutes and we'll start going through the solution together to see if you are on the right track. Okay, so the first one that we're going to do is 1,000 units per year. So I'm going to enter that in as the starting basis for our expected output, just because it's going to make things a little bit easier to understand if we have some actual numbers rather than just leaving that first one blank. Okay, so I'm going to put here 1,000 units per year. And the interest rate that it says here at the top is that our MAR is 9%. So 0.09 is the interest rate. The first cost of option 1 is $2 million. And so it's an outflow. And for the salvage value, it's going to be an inflow. So we need to differentiate between the two. And so I'm going to put negative 2 million. Option 1, and then option 2 is 1.3 million, so negative $1.3 million. I get enough zeros? I think I need one more. All right. The predicted life for computer controlled is 10 years versus 7 years for manual control equipment. The salvage value is 150,000 for option 1 and 0 for option 2. Now, the cost of the labor, dollars per hour of operation, is lower for the computer controlled at 180 per and 195 for option 2. The productivity is 3 units per hour for option 1 and 2.4. It's less productive for option 2. Now, here's the first part that's maybe a little bit tricky, where it says how many hours are needed to make the expected output. So here, our first analysis is for $1,000. And so, not dollars, 1,000 units. 1,000 units per year. So if we want to make 1,000 units, how many hours of operation is required if we can do 3 per hour? So it takes 1/3 of an hour to make an item, and we want to make 1,000 items, so it's going to be 1,000 divided by 3. So it is this expected output, and I'll anchor my reference to that so I can drag to the right, divided by the productivity. So think about the units there. The units, when we're done, are going to be hours per year. So it's hours per year. 333 for the computer controlled, and then the manual controlled takes more hours. So it needs more time since it's less efficient. Okay, now, first of all, the fixed costs here are our capital recovery. And remember, that's the difference between the inflow and the outflow. The first cost and the, do we need to round that up? No, we don't need to round it up. We would round it up if it was number of units, because you can't use you couldn't make part of a unit, but you can work for less than a full hour. So we can leave the hours as a fraction. Okay, so the fixed cost, capital recovery. So to do that, we use the payment function. So equals PMT. Payment function is how we find an annual value based on a first cost, which would be a present value, and then the salvage value is going to go into the future value location here. So first of all, the reference to rate, we'll click up here into cell B5 and press the F4 button to anchor it. Okay, N, the number of years, is going to be different between the two. So I'll click here in this cell, and then when I drag it to the right for option 2, it will move its view over to where it says 7. All right, present value, I'm going to put the minus sign because Excel will always flip things if I don't. And now I need to refer to an amount that's at the present. So what is the present value that I'm trying to annualize? So that is the first cost. And now, comma, include the future value. I'll put the minus sign in just because we have to, otherwise Excel is going to flip a positive to a negative. So minus sign, and now reference the salvage, which is that amount out there in the future. And then I can close parentheses. That is all that I need. And so the capital recovery for option 1 is $301,000. And if I drag that to the right, you should see it costs $258,000 for option 2. So we certainly have to make less revenue to cover option 2. Option 2 is less money up front, but it's more money to operate if you're trying to make a lot of units and it's working less efficiently. Okay, now the variable costs is the labor expense. And so let's go back here to our labor cost, because I think here it says it's $180 an hour for computer controlled and $195 for manual controlled. So the labor costs are going to be dollars per hour multiplied by the number of hours per year. So 60,000 in labor, and by the way, that is an outflow, so I ought to put a minus sign into the formula there because costs are minus. Our capital recovery was in terms of a minus, so I want both of them to be minus. And then drag that to the right. Our labor costs are higher if we have the manual control. Okay, so then the total cost will be the combination of variable and fixed. So it's this plus that, which means if we're making 1,000 items per year, then the cheaper is option 2. What I've done is a conditional formatting, and it's probably still in that template file if you have it. I selected the 2, and I went into, conditional formatting. I'll clear the rules that are there now. I'll set it up again just so you see. Conditional formatting, new rule, and of this that's selected, I want to select only the top or bottom ranked value. And so I want the higher of the two. So the bigger number is going to be less costly because these are minus, and so minus 361 is a smaller number. It's more negative, meaning bigger cost. And so I want to highlight the one that's good, that I should get. So highlight the top one. I didn't do that. What did I mess up? Let's see here. Conditional formatting. I'll clear the rules and I'll set it up again. Oh, I know. I never told it what to do. Yeah. So it's going to be the top one, but then I have to tell it what to do. So now in the format is where I can tell it to bold the one that is the highest. Hopefully now we will see, yeah, okay. So the best one gets bolded. Okay, so are there any questions so far? Madison? All right. Well, it becomes pretty easy then to analyze what goes on at 3,000 units per year. Conditional formatting tab is under Home. So Home, and then it's just to the right of this number stuff. Conditional formatting, and then do New Rule. Okay, so that was 1,000. Now look, if we put in 3,000, which was another part of the in-class exercise. If you put in 3,000, then it's option 1 that has the lower cost. So if you're making 3,000 per year, then it's better to have that increased efficiency of option 1, because even though it costs more up front, your labor costs are so much less. So you'll notice that there's a big labor cost. If you're making 3,000 a year, option 2 has a very large labor cost, and that outweighs the incremental additional cost and capital recovery. Okay, so you'll notice here it says difference. Let's do the difference in the two. So one minus the other, and it doesn't matter which. We need this difference so that we can use goal seek, because we don't exactly know what is going to be the dollars where the break-even point occurs. We don't know how many units, and we don't know what the cost of the break-even point will be. But what we do know is that the difference in cost will be 0. So once you set up the difference, now you can do goal seek. So it's on the data tab, what if analysis, goal seek, and our goal is for the difference to be 0 by changing the number of units. So take a look at how I've set that up. I'm saying set the difference to 0 by changing the output. And so we know the break-even point is somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 because we've just observed it switch from option 2 being preferable to option 1 being preferable. And so what we're trying to find, as soon as I click OK, it's going to go and find this break-even point where the two options are equivalent. And so then we'd know any amount of production to the left would be one option, and any amount of production to the right would be the other. Okay, so let me do OK, and it plays around with some numbers, and it finds that 2,045.62 is the break-even point. And so in this case, we need to round to the closest whole number, so it would be 2046. So if you make more than 2046, then the option 1 is preferable. So like if I make 2047, option 1 is better, but if I make 2045, then option 2 is better. So that shows you the break-even point between alternatives. That is the conclusion of our in-class exercise. And so here you'll notice I say that you should write a brief summary about which alternative should be purchased under what conditions. I think it's a great habit to get in, to be able to explain the conclusion of what's in a spreadsheet. Just the spreadsheet itself is kind of sterile. It's not telling you what you learned from your analysis. And so I'm asking you here to articulate, like, what's the decision criteria? Tell me about the break-even point and when we switch from one option to the other. Okay, so that's all the time for today. I thank you for being here. I'm sorry that it wasn't in our schedule to have a day off. I know that probably in some of your other classes you've got a day off today, and we just couldn't make it work with the things that we have remaining to cover in the semester, but I do appreciate you being here. I hope you have a great weekend. It looks like it's going to be gorgeous weather. I'm going to be spending the weekend running out in Fayetteville, West Virginia, and I can't wait to be out on the trail and enjoying the woods. I hope you find something to do that's nice over the weekend besides just homework and schoolwork. You got to take time for yourself every now and then. That's all I have for you. So if you've got questions, please feel free to get in touch, and I will see you on Monday.